The sun over Sicily was relentless that August afternoon in 1943. Heat shimmered across the battered hills, the dust hanging in the air like a reminder of every shell fired, every village taken, every life lost. Allied troops, American and British, moved with exhaustion carved into their faces, their uniforms darkened by sweat and soot. The battles for Troina, for Palermo, for the mountain passes, had drained everything from them. But something else filled the air now. Something unspoken, something electric. Word spread, first as a whisper, then as a rumor, then as a shockwave racing through every Allied camp. Patton is entering Messina. Messina, the final objective of the Sicilian campaign. Messina, the symbolic finish line. Messina, the city whose capture would mark the end of the Axis in Sicily. And Patton had arrived first. For days, British commanders had predicted it would be Montgomery who claimed the prize. Montgomery, the meticulous planner, the precise strategist. The British commander whose North African brilliance had made him a legend. But now the impossible had happened. General George S. Patton, with his swagger, his speed, his volcanic energy, had outrun, outmaneuvered, and outpaced every prediction and every British expectation. Montgomery, standing over his operations table with dust still clinging to his boots, received the news not from a messenger, not from an officer, but from the sudden silence in the room. A silence so sharp it pierced through the map-lined tent like a blade. He looked up slowly. His officers avoided his eyes. He already knew. Patton had beaten him. And in that instant, everything Montgomery said, everything he felt, everything the Allied command witnessed, became one of the most human moments of the entire war. Chapter 1. Two giants who couldn't be more different. Before the world ever knew of their rivalry, before Messina became a battlefield of pride, two men had already been set on a collision course. Bernard Law Montgomery. Precise, methodical, controlled. A man who sharpened battle plans with the same severity he used to sharpen discipline. He believed wars were won through caution, preparation, and patience. George Smith Patton. Explosive, aggressive, unpredictable. A man who spoke like bullets and moved like lightning. He believed wars were won through speed, force, and fearlessness. They were heroes forged in different ways. Montgomery, the surgeon of warfare. Patton, the storm. And in Sicily, those storms collided. What began as cooperation slowly became competition. What was officially a joint Allied strategy quietly became a race. A race neither general openly admitted, but both privately fueled. Messina became the finish line none dared to put on paper. Chapter 2. The heat of Sicily and the battle within. Sicily burned under the August sun. Villages lay cracked and broken from weeks of fighting. Olive trees stood scorched, their branches like blackened fingers reaching toward the sky. The roads were narrow, broken, winding, perfect terrain for defenders, brutal terrain for attackers. Montgomery's forces pushed through the steep western corridors, terrain so difficult that progress was measured in meters, not miles. Every step forward was paid for with sweat, blood, and hope. But Montgomery believed in the inevitable. His method was slow but certain. He had calculated the Axis retreat patterns. He had mapped out every possible last stand. He was certain, absolutely certain, that his advance would force the Germans out. Then came the sound that changed everything. Engines, fast, relentless, thunderous, rolling across the Sicilian interior. It was the American 7th Army, moving with a speed that didn't make sense on the map. Patton wasn't following the expected routes. He wasn't fighting the expected battles. He wasn't stopping long enough to give Montgomery a chance to catch up. He was racing. He was hunting. And he was headed for Messina. Chapter 3. The radio message. Montgomery's tent was hot, dusty, and tense. The maps were arranged on the table exactly as he wanted them. Clean lines, straight edges, clear markers. Even in war, order mattered to him. Then the radio crackled. Static. A faint hum. A voice weighted by disbelief. British command. This is reconnaissance. Report confirmed. American armored units entering Messina from the west. Silence. A long, consuming silence. Montgomery's fingers tightened around the edge of the map. His jaw clenched. The officers in the tent stared down at their boots, afraid to even breathe. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The disappointment thickened the air. The reality settled in like dust on abandoned ruins. Patton had done it. Patton had reached the city Montgomery believed would be his. Chapter 4. What Montgomery said. Montgomery inhaled deeply, his chest rising with both pride and wounded ego. He stepped back from the table and finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, controlled, but heavy. Well, good on him. One officer blinked. Had they heard that correctly? Montgomery continued, his tone surprisingly steady. War isn't a game of claiming prizes. It is not Messina that matters. He paused, looking back at the map as if it held the soul of the campaign. It is victory that matters. Another officer shifted nervously. Montgomery added, softer but more human than any of them expected. Patton played his hand boldly, and he played it well. There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, only a mixture of disappointment and respect, a rare blend, especially for a man who guarded his pride like armor. He walked slowly, placing a hand on the map over the stretch of coastline Patton had taken. If his speed hastened the Axis collapse, he tightened his grip slightly. Then we all benefit. Then came the line none of the officers ever forgot. There is more honor in victory than in being first. He straightened his tunic, exhaled, and added, send the congratulations. Properly. His officers nodded, still stunned. Montgomery stood alone for a moment after they left. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He simply breathed. The race was over. Patton had won. And Montgomery, despite everything, accepted it with grace. Chapter 5. Inside Montgomery's mind. What Montgomery said publicly was one thing. What he felt privately was more complicated. He had won at Messina, not for glory, not for ego, but because he believed capturing it himself would prove his strategy right, prove that discipline and planning always outweighed aggression and instinct. But Patton had proven something else. That sometimes war favors boldness. That speed can save lives. That unpredictability can break the enemy's will. Montgomery knew he had witnessed something undeniable. Patton had not just won a race. He had changed the campaign. And that truth weighed heavily on Montgomery's shoulders. More than any shell. More than any operation. More than any setback. Yet beneath the sting of defeat, there was respect. Patton had fought brilliantly. And Montgomery, for all his stubbornness, could not deny brilliance when he saw it. Chapter 6. The meeting that never happened, but should have. Later that evening, as the sun fell behind the Sicilian hills, Montgomery stepped outside his tent. The breeze brushed against his dust-covered uniform. The sounds of troops eating, laughing, resting drifted through the camp. In the distance, Patton was in Messina, greeting cheering troops and triumphant soldiers who had marched with impossible speed. Montgomery stood alone, staring toward that unseen city. And though he did not say it aloud, the words formed clearly in his mind. Well done, George. You beat me fair. He exhaled. He adjusted his beret. He walked back inside, ready to continue the campaign. Because rivalry or not, pride or not, glory or not, the war was not over. Not even close. The real enemy was still out there. And Montgomery would not let his ego distract him, not now, not ever. The sun beat down on the battered dirt roads of Sicily as armored. Columns groaned forward, engines roaring, dust clouds rising like ghosts behind every vehicle. The island smelled of heat, diesel, and distant gunpowder, the bitter perfume of war. And in the middle of it all, two men, two legends, fought a race neither of them could publicly acknowledge. But everyone knew. Patton knew. Montgomery knew. And the soldiers under them felt the tension like electricity in the air. The American advance, fire and fury. American troops under Patton surged through villages that seemed frozen in time. Narrow stone streets, crumbling walls scarred by shrapnel, children peeking out from behind doorways, their faces dirty and hollow from years of war. Some waved, some only stared. But even through the ruins, Patton's advance felt unstoppable. Sherman tanks growled their way forward, their treads biting into the dry Sicilian soil. Jeeps darted around like insects. Messengers rushing orders from one battalion to the next. Infantry marched with rifles slung low, helmets tilted forward, sweat cutting dark streaks through the dust on their faces. They were tired, desperately tired, but they were winning. Patton rode near the front line, his pistols shining on his belt, his posture straight as a pillar of iron. Every time his convoy halted, He sprang out, barking orders with precision and fire. Keep moving. Move faster. The enemy is running. Don't give them a chance to breathe. He wasn't fighting for glory. He wasn't fighting to impress Eisenhower. He wasn't even fighting to change the course of Sicily. He was fighting to beat one man, Montgomery. Every road conquered, every hill taken, every German retreat, Patton pushed harder, faster, more recklessly. Sometimes too recklessly. His officers whispered behind him. He's trying to outrun the British. He wants Messina before Monty. God help anyone who stands in his way. But their whispers carried no frustration, only admiration. Because his men believed in him. They followed him not because they had to, but because something about Patton made them feel invincible. He treated them harshly, yes. He demanded perfection. He demanded courage. But he also spoke to them with a fire that lit their spirits, even in exhaustion. You're the best damn army the world has ever seen. Now show the world why. Montgomery's slow and steady march. Far to the east, Montgomery advanced with an entirely different philosophy. Order, control, precision. His troops moved like a great machine, the British Eighth Army, polished and disciplined. Their columns were neat, their schedules exact. Their commanders followed structured, measured plans. Montgomery's headquarters looked almost peaceful. Maps were arranged neatly on wooden tables. Officers studied them methodically. Every move was calculated with care. Montgomery stood over the maps, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful. He wore his classic black beret, his confidence intact, his posture calm. "We will take our objectives in the proper order," he said in his crisp voice. "No need for haste. No need for theatrics. War is not a horse race." His officers nodded. His staff agreed. His army respected him deeply. But deep down, they all felt it, the pressure of Patton's advance. Because every morning, new reports arrived. General Patton's forces have captured another town. American armor is pushing north faster than expected. Patton is closing in on the coastal route. Montgomery would stare at the page a second longer than usual. His jaw would tighten, just slightly. Then he would set the report aside and continue issuing calm, steady orders. But by the fifth or sixth report, his irritation became clear. "Patton is moving too fast," he muttered once, unaware an aide overheard. "Far too fast. This is not how proper campaigns are fought. One does not simply sprint through Sicily." Yet Patton was sprinting and winning. The general staff meetings, tension between allies. In the Allied headquarters, the atmosphere thickened with every passing day. American officers were energized, proud, almost electric in their enthusiasm. Patton's driving straight through the center of the island. He'll outmaneuver Monty by miles. He may reach Messina any day now. Meanwhile, British officers grew increasingly defensive. Patton is reckless. He's ignoring coordination. He'll overextend and collapse. Even Eisenhower began sensing the rivalry, turning into something deeper, something dangerous. He held a staff meeting that felt less like a strategic briefing and more like refereeing two heavyweight fighters. His voice was controlled, diplomatic. "Gentlemen, let's remember we are allies. The goal is not to beat each other. It is to defeat the Axis." The Americans nodded politely. The British nodded politely. But everyone knew the truth. The goal had already changed. The race was underway. And the finish line was Messina. Patton's final dash. He could almost smell victory. With each passing mile, Patton's obsession with beating Montgomery grew fiercer. He barely slept. He barely ate. His eyes were always scanning maps, terrain, routes, anything that could give him another inch of speed. When his officers warned him about supply shortages, Patton slammed his fist on the hood of his Jeep. "Then we'll fight hungry. We'll fight with our teeth if we must." When someone mentioned Montgomery's progress, Patton snapped. "Monty can have the rest of Sicily. I'll take the prize." He meant it. He could already picture the moment. The American flag rising over Messina. The newspapers calling him the man who won the race. Montgomery arriving hours, maybe minutes, too late. Some say Patton wanted victory like a man wants oxygen. Others say he wanted it like a man wants revenge. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to prove that the American army, his army, was every bit as capable, professional, and unstoppable as the legendary British forces that had dominated headlines for years. Montgomery's frustration wound to his pride. As more reports came in, Montgomery's frustration turned into something deeper, something quietly painful. He respected Patton. He admired American strength. But he also believed, fully, completely, that he was the superior commander, the more experienced commander, the more intelligent commander. He had defeated Rommel. He had stood alone against the German tide in North Africa. He had earned his reputation through grit and brilliance. So to be outraced by Patton, an American general known for aggression, theatrics, and showmanship, felt like a bruise to his pride. One evening, as the sun set over the Sicilian hills, Montgomery stood outside his command tent. An aide approached with the latest intelligence. "Sir, the Americans are nearing the outskirts of Messina." Montgomery didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply nodded. "Very good," he finally said. "Then we must continue. We shall do our duty." But the aide noticed something unusual. Montgomery's hands were trembling, not from fear, from anger, from disbelief, from the slow realization that Patton might actually do it. The final night before the finish, Patton's men pushed through the final hills as darkness fell across Sicily. Exhausted soldiers collapsed beside their trucks for minutes of sleep. Tank crews cleaned their barrels under the moonlight. Medics treated men by lantern glow, their hands stained with dust and blood. Patton walked among them in silence. He knew this was the end. He knew sunrise would bring the final push. And he knew, deep inside, that victory was almost in his grasp. He looked over the dark outline of the mountains ahead and whispered to himself, "Messina, tomorrow you are mine." Montgomery's last march, too little, too late. Montgomery also advanced through the night, his columns moving steadily but slowly. His troops were disciplined, orderly, controlled, just as he demanded. But the hours were slipping through his fingers. He felt it. His officers felt it. History was shifting without him. One officer tried to encourage him. "We're still close, sir. There's a chance." Montgomery shook his head. Not angrily, not bitterly, but with a quiet realism. "Patton has already won. Now let us do our jobs with dignity." It was one of the most honest things he had ever said. Dawn over Messina. The sun rose like fire over the Strait of Messina, casting golden light across the battered buildings, the rubble, and the empty streets. A few German snipers still lingered, but their fight was already over. The Axis had begun their retreat days ago. Messina was waiting, silent, breathless, a city expecting two armies, but knowing only one would arrive first. Patton enters Messina. History is made. American jeeps rolled into the city at sunrise, their engines echoing off stone walls. Tanks followed, then infantry. Civilians began emerging, waving white cloths, greeting the soldiers with cautious relief. Then, finally, Patton entered. He stood in his jeep, the wind whipping his scarf, his eyes scanning the city he had fought so hard to reach. For a moment, he allowed himself the rare feeling of triumph. He had done it. He had beaten Montgomery. He had won the race. He turned to his aide with a rare smile. "Send the signal. Messina is ours." It was one of the most electrifying moments of his life. Montgomery arrives later and sees Patton waiting. Hours later, Montgomery's convoy finally reached the city outskirts. He rode in silence, staring at the American flags already flying over the harbor. His lips pressed together tightly. As he entered the city, he saw Patton waiting for him, standing tall, unmoving, almost like a statue carved from stone. Montgomery stepped out of his vehicle. The two men locked eyes. Hours separated them, but those hours meant everything. Patton offered a polite, formal nod. Montgomery returned it, his face revealing nothing, his posture perfect, his pride wounded but not broken. He spoke first. "Congratulations, George." Patton nodded again. "Thank you, Bernard." There were no insults, no shouting, no bitterness, just two great commanders acknowledging. A moment one would never forget, and the other would never escape. Messina lay quiet under the late afternoon sun, its streets filled with dust, debris, and the distant rumble of Allied vehicles still rolling in. The smell of burnt metal and lingering smoke mixed with the salty breeze, drifting across the strait. The city was wounded, but alive, and in the center of it all stood two men, two legends, two rivals. General George S. Patton, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The race had ended. Messina had chosen its victor. Now came the moment history would remember, not for the victory, but for the words spoken. between two warriors who understood each other more deeply than they ever admitted. The silence after the storm. Montgomery stepped down from his staff car, his polished boots touching the dusty ground. The moment felt heavier than any battlefield he had walked onto, not because of defeat, but because of what this defeat symbolized. Reputation, pride, legacy. He adjusted his beret slowly, buying himself a second to regain composure. His officers behind him watched cautiously, as if expecting thunder to roll from his mouth. But Montgomery said nothing. Patton stood just a few steps away, hands behind his back, jaw tight. He looked victorious, but not arrogant. The rivalry between them had been fierce, even childish at times, but in this moment, Patton felt something unexpected. Respect. Montgomery walked toward him. Their shadows met before they did. When the British commander finally stopped, the air between them felt charged, like two storms colliding in silence. Then he spoke, the words that broke the tension. Montgomery's voice came out soft, lower than usual, almost reflective. Patton, I underestimated you. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 battles. Patton's spine straightened, as if electricity had gone through him. No American newspaper headline could ever match the satisfaction of hearing that sentence from this man. Montgomery continued, his tone steady but laced with honesty. I fought the Germans. I fought the desert. I fought impossible odds. But I've never fought a man who treats war like you do. Patton didn't interrupt. For the first time, he wanted to hear every word. Montgomery exhaled, a long, tired breath. You move faster than logic. You strike harder than reason. And you take risks that would terrify most commanders. He paused. And yet somehow, you make it work. There it was. The admission of a rivalry Montgomery had never openly acknowledged. Patton's eyes softened, not with pity, but with genuine understanding. This wasn't gloating. This wasn't triumph. This was mutual respect forged through fire. Montgomery cleared his throat and added, in Sicily, you didn't just beat me to Messina. You rewrote the rules of pursuit warfare. I have no excuse. You won fairly. Patton spoke at last. Bernard, you fought brilliantly, in your own way. Montgomery chuckled, a small, dry laugh. In my own slow way, you mean? Patton cracked the faintest smile. I didn't say slow. Montgomery raised a brow. You didn't have to. For the first time in weeks, both men smiled at the same moment. And in that moment, even if briefly, the rivalry became a friendship. What they said when no one else was listening. Once the formalities ended, the two generals walked a short distance away from their staff, speaking privately for the first time since the campaign began. Montgomery was the first to break the silence. George, he said quietly, had the Germans held their positions, your speed might have cost thousands of lives. Patton nodded. I know. And yet, Montgomery continued, without that same speed, the Germans might have escaped entirely. Patton looked surprised. Montgomery rarely gave double-sided judgments. Montgomery clasped his hands behind his back and stared at the coastline. I suppose that's what makes you you. And what's that supposed to mean? Patton asked cautiously. Montgomery turned to him. You're the storm, George. Patton blinked. Montgomery continued. A military hurricane. Unpredictable, violent, and impossible to outrun. I plan my battles like a mathematician. You fight them like an artist. He paused. And sometimes, art defeats mathematics. Patton swallowed, not out of emotion, but out of shock. He had expected excuses. Anger, frustration, but not this. Montgomery added one more line. Quiet, almost whispered. When history writes about Sicily, it will write your name first. The words hit Patton harder than any medal he ever received. An alliance restored. Later that evening, U.S. and British officers gathered in a makeshift command tent. Their voices low, their faces tense. Everyone was bracing for political fallout. The rivalry had reached newspapers, radio broadcasts, even the halls of London and Washington. Then the tent flap opened, and Montgomery and Patton walked in together. Side by side, every officer in the room froze. Even Eisenhower looked stunned for a moment. Montgomery cleared his throat and addressed the room. I want it understood, he began, his voice crisp and commanding, that General Patton has distinguished himself in Sicily. His operations have been conducted with boldness and skill. Any suggestion that our forces were at odds is exaggerated. Patton stood straighter. Montgomery glanced toward him. The Americans have proven themselves capable of fighting with incredible speed and courage. It has been an honor to fight beside them. The British officers exchanged glances. The American officers tried not to smile. Eisenhower exhaled, relieved. Patton waited, then stepped forward. I agree with Field Marshal Montgomery. The British Eighth Army fought with honor and discipline. Any rivalry between us, he said with a slight grin, was purely motivational. Montgomery gave him a sideways glance. Mild motivation, I assure you, Patton added. Montgomery smirked, and the room erupted in quiet laughter. A tense alliance had been healed, not by politicians, but by two generals who finally understood each other. The private reflections of two legends. That night, both men sat alone in their separate quarters, each writing in his journal. Montgomery wrote, Patton has earned my respect. I do not like his methods, but I cannot deny his results. He is a commander forged by instinct rather than theory. And instinct, properly guided, wins wars. Patton wrote in his own stark handwriting. Montgomery is slow, cautious, meticulous. But beneath it all is courage and brilliance. He fights like a chess master. I fight like a gambler. And in Sicily, the gambler won. Two very different reflections. Two very different men. But one shared truth. Both were essential to victory. The soldiers' reactions, what they saw. The American soldiers celebrated quietly, no large crowds. No shouting, just relieved smiles and exhausted handshakes. They knew what they had achieved. They knew they had beaten the legendary British general to the finish line. But they also respected their British comrades deeply. That Monty fellow, one American soldier said while cleaning his rifle, he's tough as iron. Yeah, his buddy replied, but Patton? Patton just doesn't stop. On the British side, soldiers spoke openly among themselves. Patton's a madman, one said. A brilliant madman, another corrected. A dangerous one, a third added. Perhaps, the sergeant said. But he got to Messina first, didn't he? None of the men hated the others. They were allies. They were brothers. The rivalry was for the generals. The victory belonged to all of them. The final conversation before they parted. As the operation began shifting toward planning future campaigns, Montgomery approached Patton one last time before leaving Messina. George, he said, I want to leave you with a thought. Patton raised an eyebrow. Montgomery continued. Be proud of this. You earned it. But do not let this victory blind you. War is long. Many chapters are still unwritten. Patton nodded respectfully. And you, Bernard? Montgomery smiled, genuine, warm. I'll see you on the next battlefield. But next time, I intend to arrive first. Patton laughed. Then you'd better start now. Montgomery gave him one final nod. Good luck, George. Patton saluted. Good luck, Bernard. And with that, they parted. Two titans walking back into the storm of war, knowing full well they would meet again in the pages of history. What Montgomery said later, the line history remembered. Months later, when asked privately by a British officer how he felt about Patton reaching Messina first, Montgomery replied with a single sentence that captured everything. Patton won the race because he refused to admit it was a race. And that was the truth. Montgomery had fought a campaign. Patton had fought a competition. And competitions demand not caution, but hunger. Montgomery understood that at last, and accepted it. The legacy of the race to Messina. In the years that followed, historians, writers, and veterans would all recount the story differently. Some called it rivalry. Some called it jealousy. Some called it genius. But those who were closest to the battlefield knew the truth. Messina was more than a victory. It was a turning point. A moment when two generals stopped seeing each other as rivals and started seeing each other as equals. A moment when America proved its strength. A moment when Britain proved its grace. A moment when the Allied war machine united more than ever before. Patton and Montgomery would continue to clash, argue, disagree, but underneath it all, a strange brotherhood formed between them, because only they understood the burden of command, the weight of thousands of lives, the pressure of history pressing against their backs, the fear of failure, the hunger for victory, the madness of war. And in that shared fire, respect was born.